My name is Chris Woods of Woods Landscape Design, and tonight's presentation is going to be mainly focused on fire resilient landscapes. We're going to talk about a little bit about design and materials, and um, we'll get started here. So we've got a big presentation tonight, so I wanted to just give you a presentation agenda overview. We've got a few poll questions that I would really like to send out and get your feedback on. We'll take some time for questions in between these topics. So we've got time for questions. And Garrett, if we could go ahead and shoot out those poll questions, that would be great.
All right, that poll should be active now. I'll give it a little bit of time for y'all to answer. We'll say 30 seconds and then we'll close it and we should be able to review it from there.
Yeah, sounds good. So while we're waiting for those, actually, we'll just wait for those, if that's all right.
All right, I'll give it about 10 more seconds. So get your answer in if you haven't.
Yeah, I'm very curious.
All right, I'm going to close the poll now. And all right, we should be able to see our results. Are you able to see poll results popped up, Chris?
Yeah, so it looks like people are not re-landscaping after a fire. And they are wanting to make their yards more fire resistant. Great. Okay, and they're familiar with defensible space. Okay, that's great. Well, I'm happy to see that not everyone attending is landscaping after a fire, so that's great. So let's just go right into it. We're going to be talking about defensible space and some definitions here. So first of all, those of us who are living in Boulder County right now and a lot of counties along the Front Range, we are living in what's called a wildland urban interface. So that's where, human development is butting right up to undeveloped wildlands, which could cause vegetative fuels to ignite. So a couple other definitions were, what's the difference between fire resistant and fire resilient? It's so fire resistant is more the building structural elements that are able to withstand high temperatures before burning. And fire resiliency is, landscaping that can be created by using defensible space and the ability of your landscape to function after a fire. And, a landscape that's less likely to ignite and more likely to recover from a fire. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight is fire resilient landscaping and defensible space. So defensible space, as you can see from these photos below, the image on the left is defensible space before it was mitigated. So it's really the area that's between the structure and any potential oncoming wildfire. And you want to be able to get that vegetation away from the structures so that there's not a fire intensity right next to the structure. So on the image below, we've got defensible space that before, which obviously you can see that the evergreen trees are very close to the structure. There's pine needles and pine cones all along the floor there. And on the right, how it has been trimmed back and the debris on the ground has been removed. And I was just noticing today that there's a little St. Francis statue down there on the property too, hopefully protecting their land there. So what is defensible space? So it's divided into three separate zones. And tonight we're going to be talking about zone 1 and zone 2 mostly. Zone 1 is zone 1 is your most critical area, right? It is the area that's right next to your structures, 0 to 5 feet from your furthest structure. Your structure can be and from like your rooftop, your gutters, your garage space, your sheds, anything like that is considered your structure. Um, Zone 2 is from 5 feet to 30 feet from their furthest point of the structure, and zone 3 is beyond that. So zone 1 is your most critical area around the perimeter of your home and structures. You can see on this diagram that there's very little vegetation, and the gray area around that house that encircles that house is hardscape. So this is your most critical area of your house of trying to eliminate any kind of ignition. So you want to eliminate your ignition potential between the first 5 to 8 feet of all structures. Um, so if anything's attached to your home, it's part of your structure. So that includes your stairs, your decks, your gates. So you want to try and revamp those materials into non-flammable materials. This is where there's most potential fuel for fires. Think about your decking, if embers are cruising through the air, they get in between those slats of wood, and anything below that deck has a chance of igniting because those embers are coming through that decking. So you want to so fuel for fires is, your firewood. It could be planters, it could be your doormats, it could be the cushions on your patio and your propane tank. So it's really important on this first 5 to 8 feet from your structures to keep the corners of the structures clear of any type of combustible materials, which could be vegetation, dried leaves, pine needles, any type of fibrous materials. For me, I have a cottonwood that sheds like crazy in June and July, and that would be considered fibrous materials building up in the corners. You want to remove any branches that overhang or touch the roof or the chimney or the power lines. This is an area where you want to use extreme firewise plants and keep them very well maintained. And it's also an area where you want to revamp and use some sort of hardscape materials around the perimeter of your house. Zone 2 is the next specific area to reduce fuel intensity from approaching your house. So you can see on this diagram that there are some shrubs, there are some plants and everything, but they're placed way further out from the structure. So in zone 2, which is 5 to 30 feet from the furthest point of your structure, again, you want to make sure that your tree canopy is at least 10 feet from the structures. The tree should also be limbed up 6 to 10 feet from the ground surface, and look for any dry vegetation below those trees to prevent ladder fuels. And I'll get into ladder fuels a little bit later in this presentation. You want to water lawns regularly, but don't overwater them, but you don't want anything to become too dry. So you want to mow your grasses and your weeds, keep those down to like a 4-inch minimum. Again, remove any dead plant material, especially during the May to September fire season. And then choose your fire resistant plant materials wisely and water them regularly and keep them well maintained. And again, in this area, you should probably consider using non-organic mulch by using a gravel chip versus wood mulch, especially about 15 feet out from the structure of the house. So you can see on this image down below is, they've got hardscape on the porch. It's concrete, and then they've got a planting bed with chip, and then they've got a hardscape walkway, and then another planting bed there. So they're creating some defensible space in there in case a fire would come through. The hardscaping actually helps to minimize or slow the flow, I'll say, of the fire. So again, in zone 2, plants should be arranged in small groups rather than large beds, like massing or hedge rows. That creates fuel breaks, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too. So you want to break up the continuity of the beds with hardscape. And lawns can also be considered a fuel break. This is to help modify the fire behavior and slow the spread. It's a place to get creative with, dry stream beds or sculptures or ponds or other hardscape features. And again, you don't want to be storing any organic plant debris in this area. So a fuel break is, it's a hardscape implementation that can help to modify fire behavior or slow the fire. In these two examples here, the bottom left photo this property butts up to open space, and then you can see there's some gravel chip in that area, which creates a fuel break, as well as the retaining wall that's next to the patio. And in the other planting bed, there's a dry river bed and a path. Those are all considered fuel breaks. And then the image on the right as well, by having those raised retaining walls into 2 to 3 levels, it's not one big huge slope, which will deter the fire from spreading quickly. Oops, sorry. And then in zone 3, this is 30 to 100 feet out from your structures, which most of us don't have. There will be a talk in the future, upcoming. Resource Central is giving another Firewise talk on August 13th from Leslie Broadhead with Wildfire Associates, and she will be talking a lot more in detail about 0 to 100 feet. So since we're kind of out of running a bit behind, I'm just going to briefly go over these to say in this zone, you want to make sure of your, again, to keep any dead plant material, you want to remove that. You want to make sure that there is space between your trees, as you can see down here. Between canopies, you want to make sure, tree canopies, you've got between like 12 and 18 feet between your trees, so that if there was a fire, it wouldn't spread from the tree canopy. So in any zone, you want to try to eliminate any type of creating ladder fuels. And what a ladder fuel is, it's any type of a shrub or grass that's on the surface from catching fire and going up those trees and catching those on fire. So to reduce the chance of that, you want to limb trees up 6 to 15 feet from the ground. Again, you want to mow any kind of grasses below the trees, and eliminate any debris that are below those trees. So we can stop right now and take a few questions if we have any. And while we're pausing, I think that this is a really interesting graphic that's from the CSU extension fact sheet that shows you a little bit more in detail with the graphic about where to store or not store your items.
Very cool. I think in the interest of time, I got 3 questions that we can maybe
Okay,
highlight, and then we can keep moving.
okay.
So one of them that came in, Boulder tends to have small lots. If there are a couple of big trees, they're likely to overhang the house. If you want to leave the trees due to the shade value of the canopy, how high should you clear the branches up from the roof?
Hmm. I'd say try to go up about 6 feet, because that's what they're saying about from ground level up. So I would try to limb those up about 6 feet.
And then it says how close should trees be planted to a structure, but I'm guessing kind of how close can trees be planted to a structure?
Yeah, well, I think that, with all this information, you have to find your own comfort zone.
Um, and then we got a few more trickling in. We'll try and get to them as we can, but we're gonna start with this last one here and keep moving. It's a question about fire-resistant fencing. If you want privacy but can't afford stone fences, is it reasonable to have fencing with corrugated metal and wood?
So we'll be talking about fencing a little bit further in the discussion, and you know, wood is flammable. So again, I'm gonna say that, you need to find your comfort zone, because all these retrofits also can be costly. So, you need to do what you can do, and a little bit of wood is better than a lot of wood, I'll say. So, all right, shall we move on?
I think let's keep
Okay,
moving.
thanks, Garrett. Thanks for the questions, everybody. Okay, so we're gonna get into some fencing and firewise materials. So, whenever you can, you want to use fire resistant materials for your home, your sheds, your decks, your stairs, your outbuildings. And fencing, it's considered if it's touching the house like a gate, it's part of the house. So wherever you can, you want to replace those wooden gates with fire resistant materials, at least 5 to 8 feet apart. And this is an example of some corrugated metal that was attached to the house so that the clients got rid of their wood decking and put in that corrugated decking. So that's fire resistant right there. And it's important to note that wooden fencing can act like matchsticks. So once one catches on fire, it could catch fire for many homes down the line. Um, some people have suggested wildfire partners, I'm sorry, says to try to get rid of any kind of combustible materials within 3 feet of your fence on either side of your fence. So again, collaborate with your neighbors to try and get the debris away from the bottom of your fence. Instead of replacing your whole wooden fence, you could cut off the bottom 6 to 12 inches and replace that with corrugated metal. Basically, you want to, do whatever you can so that any flying embers won't accumulate next to the wooden fence. So these are some examples of some hardscape materials. The photo on the bottom left is, we've got heart flagstone patio that's butting right up against to the house. Flagstone and concrete are great to use for patios versus wood. You could use boulders and strip stone walls to create fuel breaks between the planting beds or to create raised beds. And, there's a lot of recycled materials out there from the different landscapers might not be able to use all their materials. They might have them left over from a job site. You could see Resource Central. I know we take a lot of our used materials to Resource Central and or give them away to neighbors. Um, Paths and dry stream beds can be created through various size of rocks and boulders, which is an example in this photo. These are two clients of mine that have conjoined, yards here, and we put in a dry stream bed with um, um, various materials so that they looked aesthetically pleasing, but also this dry riverbed helps to stop erosion and the water flowing down that hill. Um, but a word of caution, if you're using too much rock mulch, they can create heat islands. So that means that it gathers the heat, the radiant heat, and holds on to that. So, it's good if you have situations like that, you can plant low growing shrubs that get pretty wide and will cover up that rock. So you won't have as much of a heat island effect. So mulch is kind of some people love it, some people don't, but mulch does help control erosion and conserve moisture, especially in the roots of plants, and reduce weed growth. So there's two types. We've got organic, which are wood, compost, or shredded leaves, or inorganic, which can be any kind of, rock mulch or decomposed granite, pea gravel. And it's best to use the inorganic mulch, so the gravel chip or flagstone, in zone 1. So that's 5 to 8 inches, 5 to 8 feet of your structures. It's okay to use organic mulch further away from the structures, approximately 15 feet away, but you don't have to make it too thick. Don't reuse needles from your conifers as mulch in a fire-prone area because they readily catch and spread wildfire. You could dispose of them or try to give them away. There's a lot of people who really like using conifer needles for mulch that aren't in a wildfire zone. So organic types can be arborist mulch, which can be local, right? So arborist mulch can basically be free. The arborists mulch up a lot of the trees that they have to take down or trim. There's a program called Chip Drop you could look into. But note also that gorilla mulch, western cedar, and redwood mulch are not local, and they also can be more flammable than a fine wood mulch. And a fine wood mulch would be something called Lee Hill Peat in North Boulder carries this in bulk, as well as Harlequins carries this basic humus fine wood mulch in bagged form too. But that is a really great mulch to put around your plants. It's fine, and it if it does catch, it doesn't smolder. So that's a good choice. Ground leaves can work as a mulch. You know, you can rake those off your lawns and keep them in the gardens overwintered for overwintering insects. Compost is another good mulch. Dirt is a good mulch, or a matrix of low covering ground covers as a mulch. So otherwise known as a living mulch. So these are some samples of some inorganic mulches, right? You've got gravel mulch, local river rock of different sizes, pea gravels. So I would suggest going to one of your local landscape providers and just see what they have, see what they look like, see what could be combined so it could be aesthetically pleasing and be creative. And some chips and rock are much more expensive than others. So visit one of your local landscape providers. And I would recommend not using crusher fines or breeze as a mulch around your plants because it compacts and can choke out, it won't let water penetrate down to the plant roots. In these photos are example of a 3/8 granite chip that I use on client sites. And again, you can see on the photo on the right, that's a lot of rock mulch, but the plants that are specified in there grow low and wide, so they will cover up a lot of that space as they get older. And here's just something I threw in from the city of Ashland. They did some wood testing and mulch testing to see how quickly they burn. You can see that large chunk mulch burns really quickly and it has high flames, which you don't want. Fine grade mulch like that humus mulch might ignite, but it doesn't give out large flames. So compost mulch as a mulch can work really well as well, or dirt. So maintenance is really, really critical in for defensible space. You don't want weeds growing at the base of your structures, right? Where we're trying to clear those out. You've gone to all the trouble to make sure it's a defensible space and then you let weeds grow in there and get dry, and that could, ignite a fire. So they're the first to emerge right after a fire too. So it's really, really important to manage your weeds. And in order to manage your weeds, you need to know what kind of weeds you have. Are they annuals or perennials? CSU has a really good extension. CSU extension has a really good sheet on weeds and how to manage those. But it's hard work. You've got to manually pull them, mow them, weed whack them. Especially don't let the invasives go to seed. Sheet mulching can work, which, you put down some cardboard and mulch. Horticultural vinegar can work if you're catching some of the weeds early on. And, if all possible, please don't try to use pesticides. And weed fabric is not a cure for not having weeds. Weeds still form on top and poke through weed fabric, and then you've got a mess. And weed fabric is also made from, plastic, so you're thinking about microplastics. And generally it is flame resistant, but it still can burn and melt under high direct heat. So again, with maintenance, your plants are ever changing, right? They change with the seasons, they change all the time. So it's really important to observe your plants often and be aware of their growth habits and their seasonal change. I can't stress enough to say that to have good plants, you have a good healthy ecosystem and more fire resiliency. So you want to always check out your plants and remove any dead parts of the plant, your dead stems or your limbs. Remove your annuals, like your vegetables, as soon as they're done, and don't let them, dry up, and leave them in there, leave them in for the winter as much as possible. Perennials, once they've gone to seed, you could cut those back and rake up any leaves or conifer needles. Mow and trim your grasses to a low height in your defensible space. And according to Louisville, it is okay to mow within 10 feet of the open space if it butts up to your home. So I encourage you to do that. Um, and prune regularly. All right, we have time for a few more questions.
All right, yeah, we got a lot of them coming in, so thanks for all the engagement, everyone. Once again, we're gonna try and get to as many as we can, but keep things moving. If we do, end with a little bit of time towards the end, we can always address some more questions at the end too. Um, so one question, and I'll even add on to it based on some other questions. Can you recommend a trusted resource for identifying non-flammable construction materials? And then I think we can add on to that Firewise plants.
Yeah, so we have a whole section of Firewise plants at the end.
Oh, cool.
And regarding materials, a brand name that I know that other builders use is Fiberon and TimberTech.
Um, and then with small lots, how can we handle the flammable trees that are on next door or neighbors' lots?
I encourage you to talk to your neighbors and, work that out. Any tree limbs that are hanging over your fence on your property, you can cut. But I highly encourage talking to your neighbors about defensible space and how you can partner with them to make sure both of your properties are safe.
Um, And then someone had a question about rubber mulch. Is it fire resistant? And then do rocks around plants get too hot for the plants? So I assume that's for like rock gravel mulch.
Sure. So the rubber, I don't know. I've never used it, so I can't speak to that. I don't know why you would want to use that. But so for the rock mulch, native plants like rock mulch, so that's a good place to use it. Um, so you need to know what plants you want to use, where you want to be using them. So it's not like a yes or no answer for that. So certain plants like wood mulch and certain plants like rock mulch.
Okay. And then one more construction material related one.
Sure.
Is there anything you can paint on wood, or I'll add maybe to treat wood to make it more fire resistant?
I've heard that there is stuff that you can paint, but I don't know how fire resistant that is. Again, I'm not a home builder, so I can't really speak to that. I'm sorry. Yeah. But if anybody knows, that would be really great, to hear from somebody in the county or something. Yeah.
All right. I think we will keep moving for now.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So we're going to talk about, how to create fire resistant landscapes. So, real quick, if you are retrofitting your yard or you're starting over or whatever, it's really important to have a plan, right? It's like you wouldn't want to build anything without a plan for many reasons, but in the long term, it helps to prevent any mistakes. It helps you to take a look at, your proper drainage and your erosion control, water from your roof on your property, looking at your HOA guidelines and permits. You want to be able to use proper plant material and incorporate your Firewise landscaping principles. So have a plan. So how do you create more fire resilient landscaping? So the biggest thing is you want to minimize fuels, right? You want to minimize the fuel load that's coming towards your property, in your property, or up against your structures. And to do so, you want to create defensible space by incorporating Firewise principles around your home and structures. You want to choose your plant types wisely and the spacing. You want to keep up with maintenance. You want to, defensible space, like within the first 5 to 8 feet, is actually also to help provide firefighters with a safe environment to protect your property. And homes, like you were saying, closely built together, collaborate with your neighbors so you can share those trees for shade and privacy. It's a great opportunity to connect front yard gardens to create habitat corridors for wildlife and bees and pollinators, and also keep up with your HOA and community updates. So if you're planting right after a wildfire, it's really important to know what soil you have. Um, because after a fire, the soil is full of toxins, so it's really important to have a soil test, and you can get that also through CSU Extension Services. I've worked on a lot of new builds in the Marshall Fire area, and because of heavy equipment on those sites, the soil has gotten really hard and compacted to almost feel like it's concrete. I mean, you can't get a tiller in there or a shovel in there. So using, heavy equipment, which seems counterintuitive, right? You're trying to get that soil to get some air into it. But you want to use either some sort of excavation equipment that can get in there and rip up the soil, and so you can add amendment to it. There is an attachment for equipment called a ripper, which is like big tines that gets in there and gets all the soil dug up. And again, depending on your plant choices, because native plants don't really like heavy soil amendment, but when you're working with these compacted soils, you've got to uncompact that soil for plants to live. So specifically in your planting areas, you want to decompact that soil. And you do that by adding compost, maybe some planters mix, and possibly some expanded shale or coarse rock like squeegee or pea gravel, which helps to loosen up the soil and give some expanded shale helps to improve the soil and give it water retention. And again, CSU Extension Services is a great resource. So any plant can burn under the right conditions, even if you are choosing fire-wise plants, but fire-wise plants are mainly have a high moisture content. CSU Extension and Idaho Firewise all have really great plant lists, and you will be getting a resource list at the end of this presentation that resource will be sending out to you with these resources. Again, I can't say enough about keeping your plants well maintained, whether you're in a fire zone or not, and removing the dead portions to keep your plants healthy. And native plants are really well adapted to this climate, but not all are fire resistant. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit too. So it's important to plant a variety of types and species, not only because it's aesthetically pleasing, but that brings in healthy insects and pollinators, and it keeps your ecosystem healthy. And a healthy, vigorous landscape can better resist catastrophic fires. And if there is a drought or water rationing, you're going to want to prioritize your plants you wish to save. And I would do that within your first 5 to 8 feet of your home. Supply those with extra water and leave the rest go. But if they die, you're going to want to remove those. So this is really important to know plants that you should avoid or use sparingly. Anything with a high resin content, such as conifers, junipers, spruce, pines, big western sage, which is a native plant, rabbit brush, which is native, arborvitaes are very flammable, as well as, ornamental grasses. So again, this is where, it's your comfort zone, whether you want to leave the ornamental grasses up when they go dormant, so that they can feed the birds and give you winter interest, as well as leaving perennials such as like your coneflowers and other perennials for, winter, not only winter interest, but feeding the birds. Brooms are not advised close to the house, and vines and plants attached to a house or pergola. You want to definitely avoid planting any plants adjacent to siding, under vents, eaves, or windows. Limb trees over the roof or canopy, over your roof or touching the chimney and power lines, and never plant underneath your ducts. You can plant, or so around that 5 foot perimeter, you can plant low growing plants, and we'll get into some of those plants, but not anything more than like a few inches tall. So now we're going to get into the nitty gritty about plants. So we're going to go per zone. So zone 1 again is right up against your house from 5 feet to 8 feet out. You want to use low growing, high moisture content plants. So the image on the right, there's a lot of ground cover in there. There's a lot of sedums in there, Delosperma, some low growing thyme, Firewise plant lists, which you'll be getting a handout for, but CSU has great, the Extension Service has great handout, Idaho Firewise, and locally Harlequin's Gardens is also putting together a Firewise plant list. Plant a diversity of plants. Oh, here's a statistic we just came across here. So trim all trees 10 feet from the roof, not 6, but 10 feet from the roof. So no conifers right in that zone 1 space. What I know, West Boulder County requests no planting in zone 1. And this is where you want to use the rock mulch and hardscape materials. So again, in zone 1, low growing, compact, plant material should be well maintained. Again, up above, we've got hens and chicks and sedums, and spring flowering bulbs are a great choice for this zone because they lose their leaves by the time we get into fire season too, and they're short. So a few zone 1 plant suggestions. On the top left, we have poppy mallow, Turkish veronica in the middle. We've got ice plants. There's a lot of Delosperma and ice plants that can be used. Pinks, which are low growing, creeping phlox and sedums, yuccas, cactus, which can all be very aesthetically pleasing with some nice rock and very, very pleasing. So zone 2, that's from 5 to 30 feet. Again, think Firewise, Waterwise, drought-tolerant plants. You want to cluster your trees and shrubs into small groupings or what's called islands rather than massing. So that, and then you want to create a fuel break in between those groupings, right? So a fuel break can be like 3 to 5 feet in between. It could be lawn, as I showed before. It could be flagstone patio. It could be walkways. You want to you can use a mix of deciduous trees and conifers. You want to make sure that you maintain your irrigation and your hose bibs. And again, consider non-organic mulch within 15 feet of the house, and don't store any plant debris in this area. Some zone 2 perennials that can be used are penstemons, blanket flower, trumpet flower, which will bring in hummingbirds and pollinators. We've got sulfur flower on the bottom, which is a great low ground cover, bee balm, and golden banner. Small trees and shrubs for zone 2. This is a really great tree called autumn brilliant serviceberry. The serviceberries are great in general. The sumacs are great in general. This one is called autumn amber sumac in the middle, and I use that a lot in these big areas where we're using a lot of rock mulch, because they'll get 6 feet wide and they only grow maybe 18 inches tall. Snowberry is another local native that you can use, and Cheyenne mock orange. Zone 3, You want to create fuel breaks. It's okay to use larger plants, but you want to space out those trees and shrubs so that the tree canopies have at least 12 to 15 feet apart. You want to avoid creating those fire ladders, meaning you want to make sure there's nothing underneath those trees that can catch fire and go up the tree to create a fire ladder. And then those trees can catch on fire and blow the embers. Again, you want to be considerate of your neighbors and consider non-organic mulch. Some zone 3 plants and shrubs are the 7 sunflower, which has these beautiful red sepals in the summertime. 3-leaf sumac, which is a great native shrub, which is in the middle, and then the sucker punch chokecherry. Some other examples of firewise trees are big tooth maple, serviceberry, hawthorn, red buds are great, honey locust, and crab apples. So real quick, I'm just gonna go through these top defensible space and firewise landscaping principles. You want to make sure you remove all flammable debris 5 to 8 feet from all structures and foundation. You want to keep the corners of your structures, your gutters, and your roof clear of combustible materials. And start replacing any hazardous vegetation with fire-resistant plantings. Don't dump plant debris in adjacent wildlands or vacant lots. Store your firewood and propane away from structures at least 30 feet away. And use fire-resistant materials for decking. Don't store under the decks. And consider your fire-resistant materials for fences and gates. So healthy plants are less or more fire resistant, right? So you want to make sure that you're watering your trees throughout the summer, fall, and during dry winters. So if we haven't gotten any precipitation, like good precipitation in the winter for about 3 weeks, you want to water on a warm day. And CSU Extension has some really great resources for those as well. It's important to maintain your irrigation systems throughout the year and access to emergency water supply. So what that means is you might want to keep a hose, a 50 or 100-foot hose attached to the hose bib, or in the wintertime, not attached to the hose bib, but right there close to the bib, so that if there is potentially a ground fire nearby, you could use your hose to put that out. And if there is a fire, don't run your irrigation system if there's a fire, because it could deplete water that's needed for firefighting. And again, it's really important to help emergency responders by keeping your house address visible so they can locate you quickly, give them access to your property, and maintain access to your hose bibs and water sources. So this is going to be some resources that you're going to be getting after the webinar. That's what I've got so far, and I'm able to take some more questions.
Great. And Chris, are you even able to view the Q&A? Is that an option for you down along the bottom? Because that might help if you can even pick out questions that jump out to you, or you just want to reiterate as we go along.
No, I don't have Q&A. I have, oh, I do. Let me see here. Yeah. Okay. Wildlife pond. You can have ponds. You can use the water from your downspouts. You can't hold it, but you can for a long period of time, but you could create rain gardens where you can use that water to slow the flow and it'll percolate down into the water zone. Trees close to your house, I think that, like I said, you need to prune them up. You need to make sure that they're really well maintained, and aspen trees are, if they're old, yeah, they can be a problem. A gas barbecue grill in the deck, they're saying to move that, but I'd say that, you know, if there's high firewise days, that's when you should be on your guard too, right? Like maybe move those cushions in off your porches. Maybe, if you are in a wildfire prone area, maybe you do bring in that, propane tank, into your garage until those, the fire danger dies down. Landscape around. So 5 feet around your house, rock is best. And, if you keep up with it, I know that when you put rock down, it fills with dirt and then weeds. And that's something you have to just keep refreshing and be on. You can put down, flagstone materials like a patio or a path around that, so that weed seeds don't blow in there. Uh, Regarding removing 3 to 4 foot junipers, I would talk to an arborist or someone that can remove those. And yes, juniper should be removed from your perimeter of your house.
And I think a few of these questions, again, I don't know that construction materials are your specialty, so.
They are not, yeah. If you want to know how to keep roof water on your on your property, um, you can email me and we'll have a conversation about that. And yes, rain gardens can definitely be incorporated into a Firewise landscape. Uh, so, again, weed fabric is not the cure for, not for preventing weeds. So it's a individual choice. And pea gravel, it says, how deep should pea gravel mulch be? So around plants, you could do it like 1 to 3 inches at the most, depending on the plants, depending on the area. Is it on a slope? So I think that's it.